Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to BWTM Online. We have with us another special guest as we are going through Black History Month. We have with us today, we have the pleasure of having Justin Onuekwusi on the channel. So without further ado, I'll bring Justin in and he can explain a bit more about himself and what he does, what he's about. Justin, how are we doing? Can you hear me?
How are you? How are you getting on?
I'm good, Justin.
I can hear you perfectly.
Great, fantastic. Let's get you in the. Let's get
Very
you fully.
well, very well.
Great. So, how are you doing today, Justin?
Yeah, I'm okay, thanks. It's been a reasonably busy day, but we're through most of it, so that's pleasing.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, for people who don't know about who you are, could you just give us a brief overview as to who you are and what you're about?
Yeah, my name's Justin Onuekwusi. I grew up in Manchester in a city area called Cheetham Hill with my mother and my brother. My father is from Nigeria. My mother is from Grenada, but I grew up with just my mother. I managed to effectively get into a quite prestigious role in the city of London, where now I manage money for clients. I manage some £60 billion of client money in a team within legal and general investment management, one of the largest asset managers in the world. And then on top of being an investor, I also co-founded a movement called Talk About Black, which aims to create a platform to create more leaders in the corporate sphere. And then on top of that, I do a lot of work in general around diversity and inclusion. So, for example, I lead the diversity and inclusion networks at Legal and General Investment Management, as well as sitting on the board of City Hive, which is a diversity and inclusion company, which aims, in particular, to get more women into senior roles, but also kind of the wider aspects of diversity as well.
Okay, so let's take it back a bit. Now, I'm going to be absolute. I'm going to talk about everything in layman's terms, or would like you to talk. So, for example, what is asset management? What does that mean? Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Justin? Hello, Justin. Are you there?
Hello.
Hello, Justin. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Justin?
I can't hear you.
Your sound's gone. Maybe. I'm not sure. Your sound may have gone. But I'm loud. You can hear me?
Can't hear you at all.
Okay. Try again. Did you mute yourself? No? Can you hear me? If you can't hear me, log out, log back in.
Let me see if I can reset my headphones 1 second.
Yeah.
I'll try and take my headphones off. See if that works.
Problem. So we're just waiting for Justin to set himself up. What happens on the live?
I can't hear you at all. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Take your headphones out if you can.
Headphones are off. It's all from my speakerphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, 1 sec. No, I can't hear you. 1 sec.
Justin is gone. He will be back, no doubt. The beauty of live show. Let's just wait and see for Justin to get back. He'll be back in a moment, I'm sure. Here we go.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get the camera back on you. Right, Justin. So you're explaining as to who you are. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, what is asset management?
Yeah, so asset management is part of I'd call it the investing and savings industry. So typically, if you have a current account and you want to earn a decent interest, typically what people will do is invest in a savings account. This is taking it one step further. So investing is looking to get a greater return than on a savings account. To do that, you might invest in different asset classes, such as commodities, such as property, such as bonds, such as shares. And the idea is being that you're looking to get a greater return than on a regular savings account over time. So really for the longer term, and people's pensions, insurance money, all things like that, they tend to invest in markets to try and get a better return than a savings account, and therefore a better return than inflation overall.
Okay. So how did you get into this world, this dizzy world? How did you get into it?
Yeah, no, it's actually it's by fluke in a way. I was always relatively strong at maths at school, and in my secondary school, I ended up getting the maths award for the whole school when I was in year 11 in the GCSE year. And then when I went to sixth form, and typically in Manchester, the sixth forms aren't part of the main school. So when I was walking around the open day for sixth form, I knew I wanted to do maths. I also wanted to do politics as well. And it was a time when New Labour had just got into power, and you'd had 18 years of a Conservative government, and Manchester, or where I lived in Manchester, tended to vote Labour. So it was almost like a sort of breath of fresh air that finally the party that the city was voting for is in power. So I wanted to do politics as well. So I wanted to do maths and politics. And I thought, actually, I'll do something in between that, which actually sits in between maths and politics, which is economics. Because you can use your maths and also you can use your politics. But when I was walking around the open day, I bumped into the head of maths tutor, and he told me about a secret profession, or what he called a secret profession, called the actuarial profession. And so to be an actuary. And I didn't really know what it was, but he said you could use your maths. And, actually it was the most well-paid profession in the world. And clearly since then I've learned it wasn't. But I did work, really hard then to become an actuary, mainly because I could use my maths, but also because I never really had money growing up. So this was something that was attracted to me. I wanted to make sure that I could take care of my family and my mum, who'd worked so hard to get me to where I was. So I applied like crazy to actuarial jobs. I eventually got an actuarial job. So I went to university, did economics, applied like crazy to get an actuarial job. Eventually got that actuarial job. And then I realized it was given essentially the actuarial profession. They tend to use maths in order to solve complex problems, such as insurance premiums, such as life assurance policies. I was on the pension side, giving advice to pension schemes about the size of the pension scheme. I realized very early, within a few months, I absolutely hated it. It wasn't for me. It wasn't the highest paid profession in the world. It wasn't that much of a secret. So I realized that I wanted to work on the investment side. So an investment consulting, after hearing a training session from the investment consulting team. So I, knocked on the head of investment consultant's door, pretty much 5-6 months into this graduate job that I just had, pretty prestigious job in itself. And I said I wanted to move to investment, and he asked me why, and I said my passion is just in learning about markets. And then within a month later, he'd hired me into that investment consulting team. And, I haven't looked back really since then. Investments has been my passion.
You were one of 13 fund managers in the UK, black fund managers. Why is that the case?
Yeah, to be honest, it's a horrific number. So when you think about people, and this is people who are leading on managing money, the actual report was in 2017 by New Financial, and they found 12 black fund managers. But since then, I think we found that one other person has now joined that club. I think it's what we try to do with Talk About Black is we try to understand why that you have this situation. And we've come up with an analogy called the kinks in the hose pipe. So what are the kinks in the hose pipe? They are the structural barriers, I suppose, which stops the water from flowing through, stops the talent from flowing through. And we've identified 5 key areas: community, pipeline, entry, progression, and taboo. So firstly, taboo, I'll start with the last one, is that until a few months ago, nobody was talking about ethnicity. When they were talking about diversity, they're primarily talking about gender. Now ethnicity is more on the table and people are starting to talk about it more. Community, this is the if you look at the average Black person in society, they tend to be lower down the social mobility ladder. This means they're more prone to violent crime. It means that they're less likely to own a house. That has a challenge in itself. Then you come onto pipeline, and this is where that social mobility feeds through to education. But also the educational system, I think when you look at it, you have to put your hands up and say it doesn't favour Black people in any way at all in terms of people getting excluded. But also when people start an education, they start at the same level. And then by the end, the average Black person tends to fall behind other ethnicities. Then you come on to entry. Even when Black people are getting the right grades, they're not getting into the top jobs. Then you come on to progression, finally, is that even when Black people are getting into those roles, they're not progressing as quickly as other ethnicities, in particular white people. And part of this is because of the cultural imbalance in our businesses, which means that it's very hard for other ethnicities and people that are different to adapt. And it means that then when you get to those top jobs like fund managers, like CEOs, like CIOs, they're just limited. There's limited diversity there, and those roles tend to be dominated by white males.
So what's your secret?
Yeah. Well, I think being bold is one of them. I mentioned about knocking on the head of investment consultants' door. I think that, really did pave the way for me and provided a springboard for me to jump into the role that I'm in now. But I think education. I'm very privileged to have a mother who was so focused on education. Her being a teacher, I think, really helped. And her teaching me, I think, maths at a very early age and guided me through the kind of education system was really helpful. Resilience. My mother, I saw her, her struggle at times, and seeing somebody struggle but still remain positive and be able to bounce back from any drawbacks that you've had in life, I think has held me in has really acted as a prime example to me on how to go about my life. And I think one of the biggest things that people underestimate is luck. Okay, you can say you create your own luck, but I'm lucky that I didn't get involved in, or I wasn't pushed to get involved in some of the things that were happening in Cheetham Hill when I was growing up. I'm very lucky that I had a mum who's focused on, who had the resilience and had the education. And I think being in the right place at the right time has been really valuable for me. So I think all of those things have counted a lot. And the last point I just say is hard work. But importantly, people think that hard work is putting a towel over your head when you get into the office and just focusing on your job. But actually, hard work is actually looking at your overall skill set and saying, where are my weaknesses? If your weaknesses are in team building or networking, those are the areas that are very important to focus on. So I think being able to, be a critique of yourself again and work hard at filling those gaps again is very important.
Justin, what were the feelings or the emotions you were going through being a Black man in a white-dominated industry? How did you overcome those feelings and emotions to be where you are today?
So
I think the first thing is I don't think I've fully overcome that challenge.
Okay.
I think it comes down to belonging. There's a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion, but I think belonging is really important.
Yeah.
One of the big challenges is when you go into an organization where you are very different. And I wasn't different because I was black. I was different also because I was from Manchester. I've got, a reasonably strong accent, although it is getting more and more diluted as life goes on. But the more different, everybody has to adapt to a corporate culture. But one of the biggest challenges is the more different you are, the more you have to adapt. And the more you adapt, you give up some of your authenticity, you give up some of your true personality. I think this is the big challenge that a lot of people face when they get into the workplace. I think it is changing, and I think this is important. It is changing because companies used to say, okay, here is our culture, and everybody has to adapt to our culture. But now what they're realizing is that people, they have to adapt to other people's cultures as well, and they have to meet people halfway. And I think, particularly George Floyd this year, where a lot of companies have said, actually, we need to do something about this underrepresentation. They're realizing they have to change that corporate culture. They have to adapt that corporate culture to the people that they have, because ultimately, what is culture? It's a combination of everybody that you have in the business. I think that is fundamentally important. The last point I'd stress, I think this is really important again, is that I do mentoring, these mentoring circles every month of people between 0 and 10 years experience in the asset management industry. And the biggest challenge they have is this feeling of belonging. So I think it's really important as Black leaders in our industry, but actually Black leaders full stop, that we help people to navigate these corporate environments, because we've been through it, and actually we have to make it easier for others, because the reason why there's so few for managers is because it's pretty hard to navigate, right? So we have to try and make it easier for people to navigate that corporate environment in order to get better representation.
Do you feel that you, despite your achievements and all that you've done to qualify you for your role, that at times you're just being tolerated rather than actually being accepted for what you've done and what you've achieved within your industry?
Yeah, I think I probably thought that. I may have thought that about 10 years ago. And I've been in the industry now for, about 18 years.
Right.
So maybe about 10 years ago, I thought, I'm just being tolerated here. I'm never going to get to the top level of where I need to be, or where I want to be, or where I have ambition to be. But what's happened over the last 10 years is that I've actually started to get my own clients, my own investments, and I've been able to, as part of a team, but as a lead part of that team, develop investment strategies, build portfolios, and actually deliver good outcomes for clients overall. So once you start to do that, you start to build up some goodwill, you start to bring up some credit, you start to build up credibility. And actually it comes back to that point around authenticity. As then, you become more seen, you become more confident in your own ability, and other people become more confident in your own ability, then, you can be more authentic, you can be more of yourself, and you can aim then to kind of help others follow on the path that you've been on. So yeah, I think 10 years ago, if you asked me the question, I would have said yes. But today, I think that because I've built alongside a team, I've got to keep on saying that. But because I've built an investment business, I do feel that actually it's no longer about being tolerated, and I'm actually respected for what I've done within the asset management industry.
So I'm going to go on about this just a little bit, because the aim here is to not only educate, but to empower others that would look and go, yeah, I'd love to do that, but to remove all the excuses. This thing about being too black or losing your blackness while doing what you're doing in an industry which is, how did you negotiate or deal with that?
Yeah, I think it's really tough. And there are a lot of books and studies about authenticity. And I can only go off my own personal experience.
Right.
I think there's a lot of talk about authenticity. But I'd just say, kind of repeat what I said, is that we all have to adapt in some way. Right. The challenge is companies now are starting to meet you halfway, but they won't meet you the full way. So the way I think about this, I think of it like, and I went to a session with a coach, and he explained it like this. So I've decided to copy it and steal it, actually, because it's a very good analogy. So if you think about the world, and you cut it in half, and you've got your core in the middle, and you've got your mantle around the outside. Your core are your core beliefs and your core values, which you are not willing to adapt. I think that's really important. But then the mantle around the outside is the bits, I think, that you should be willing to adapt in order to progress your career. And it's not denying who you are, but it might be things like, actually, networking a bit more than you would, than your personality would necessarily allow. Why? Because you're learning a new skill set. You're learning how to communicate with people. Ultimately, people don't promote you if they don't like you. I mean, that's a fact, right? So
that is true.
You have to be in an environment where you have to be in an environment where you're likable. And the only way you're going to do that is by communicating with people. So it's things like that where, I talk to junior people in our industry, and actually beyond our industry, in the corporate sphere, about, if you want to progress your career, these are the things that you're going to have to work on. You are going to have to feel uncomfortable at times in order to progress yourself. I think that's vitally important.
So now the journey, you're going up the mountain now. You've made the decision. You're going to do what you're doing. You're making progress. When you have those moments where you feel unsure or you're stumbling within your industry, who did you turn to who looked like yourself to be mentored?
Yeah. So I do think it is important to find role models which have similar experiences to you. I do think that is really, you can't be what you can't see. I do actually believe that quote, or at least it makes it a lot harder to be what you can't see. So the first one is my mother, who, although didn't work in the city and is a teacher, she does understand me, and she's provided a support network to me all of my life. And I mentioned resilience. That resilience is something that has rubbed off on me, I feel. And it means that if I do get drawbacks, if I do get knocked down, I'm always looking forward. I'm always looking to the positives. I think that is really important. The second element is that talk about Black team. And actually the talk about Black network. What that has done, it's allowed me to access talent both at junior and senior levels, and it's allowed me to have discussions with people who do look like me, do have similar backgrounds to me, and have gone on very similar journeys. And that has empowered me even further to be a leader, I think, in the industry. But then I just also stress that there are role models that don't necessarily look like me, that I've had. So all of and it comes back to this thing about building personal relationships and building strong relationships with people, meaningful relationships with people. So if you think about all of my line managers at my previous roles, I still speak to them. I still have, they're all on a WhatsApp message away, and they're all willing to give me advice. None of them have been Black line managers. So I do think there is a role for non-Black role models and people that don't look like yourself, as well as people that, but it is important clearly to have people that have been on a very similar journey and have similar experiences to you.
I'm glad you said that. Thank you. Let's talk about those successes now. I mean, there's been a lot of successes that you've had. So let's just give me a few of those highlights. You really need to be celebrated. The stuff you've done is incredible.
Yeah, no, it's I'm very pleased about what I've achieved and where I've got to. I suppose one of the things, this is maybe a drawback of what my mum taught me, but it's a positive at the same time, is that I don't really look back on successes. And this year there's been, in the last few years, there's been, you know, things like awards and lists and you know, being awarded the freedom of the City of London, which was something that was really is really quite prestigious, and I'm really proud, and my mum's really proud about, and my family really proud about. But I mean, for me, it's about looking forward. It's about saying, actually, let's look at where we are now and see, you know, 13 black fund managers isn't enough. How are we going to make it more? How are we going to unkink those kinks in that hose pipe? How are we going to mentor more people to get through to senior roles? And fundamentally, outside of the day job, which is to invest in money, actually, I don't think I'd be fulfilled in my role if we don't succeed in getting better representation at that top level.
Okay, so talk about Black, which is we talk about community outreach and mentoring. What triggered it?
Yeah, so we set up so I think that the first thing is, as an industry, in fact, as a society, we're not going to solve this problem by fragmentation. And I think one of the biggest challenges of, in particular, representation when it comes to ethnicity and when it comes to Black people, is that the networks and the way it's been tried to be done in the past has been fragmented. It's been very fragmented. And I do think we all have to come together in order to create a scalable, holistic solution. That said, so how did this talk about Black Creek come together? So it's really formed out of a group called the Diversity Projects, and the Diversity Projects were, or still is, a combination, a coalition of businesses in the investment industry that have come together to solve underrepresentation across many different work streams, whether it's gender, LGBT, ethnicity, disability, etc., etc. And the ethnicity work stream, they got together, and we were kind of looking at, you know, how do we address the underrepresentation of ethnic minorities, in particular at senior levels. And what we quickly realized is that one of the biggest problems of looking at ethnicity as a whole is that different ethnicities have different experiences. And in particular, the B of BAME, which is the term which I really dislike, but the B of BAME is a big challenge. And that's when we start to dig deeper and say, okay, so how many Black people do we know who are fund managers, who are heads of sales, who are CEOs, who are CIOs? And then we quickly realized that not only there's hardly anybody there, but people weren't talking about it. So let's just normalize the conversation, and let's get this conversation on the radar in our industry, but also beyond our industry, and have a discussion about what it is to be Black in our industry, but also, you know, just get talking about ethnicity on the agenda, full stop.
A person with such experience, have you had conversations with either the Prime Minister or in government to make these things more, or be made more aware of, and be even a consultant to the government about these things?
Yeah, so we've had discussions with a number of politicians.
Right.
I spoke to Parliament a few weeks ago. Gavin Lewis has spoken to Parliament. We've got a session with the Home Office coming up in a few weeks, hopefully. We've engaged with a number of lords and some prominent lords. So that situation is ongoing. There's been a little bit of as you can imagine, with the pandemic, with Brexit, that there's been a little bit of a slowdown in pace with the change of government that we saw more recently. And now we're looking at what this government is going to do in terms of forming an ethnicity task force, because under Theresa May, one of the things that was, or one of the initiatives was an ethnicity pay gap analysis of our top businesses in the UK. And I think that would have encouraged companies to actually start collecting data on ethnicity, which is a big problem, is that they're not compelled, it's not compulsory to collect data on ethnicity. So therefore, a lot of companies just don't do it, and it's not compulsory to even for people to declare their ethnicity. So even where companies do have it, the coverage is so low that it's not worth them having it anyway. So we are engaged with governments. But there's clearly a lot more that we can do in that field, and we are working on it.
That's very encouraging to hear. The pandemic, COVID-19, lockdown, another lockdown threatening to happen in the next week. How's that affected your industry?
Yeah, I think you have to look at it, and we're still looking at the effects of it, right? So working from home is definitely a lot. I do think it's harder in an investment business, particularly if you're an investor and you've got a team process, which you're relying on conversation. I can't just walk over to the researcher's desk anymore and have a conversation with them about, I don't know, about the Chinese economy. Picking up the phone to him, getting him at the right time now. It's just a lot. It's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to get that kind of fluid, natural conversation. But what I would say is that the one thing I used to do a lot of was going and seeing clients all across the country. I've been able to do that from my office where you see me now, and I've been able to have those conversations, engage with clients, and really understand what's concerning them. So I think that aspect has been helpful. But I also think we overall, I just don't see how we go back to the way it was. Because given now we're used to speaking on kind of video conferences, speaking virtually, I think it's going to be a lot harder to encourage people that actually to go back into an office environment, particularly as there doesn't seem to be a widespread vaccine that's going to be in use for the population for quite a long time.
So with that, and there are stories that say that what would happen if the economy crashed? If the economy crashed, how does that affect your industry if the economy crashes?
Yeah, it affects our industry quite a lot, because I think if the economy crashes, and you've got to say it already has crashed, right?
Yes,
it has crashed, but it's bouncing back. It might be a slow bounce back, but it is bouncing back. It affects markets, right? Because ultimately, things like share prices are dictated by company earnings. And if company earnings fall through the ground because the economy's crashed, then that affects the stock market. What we saw in February were the steepest falls that we've ever seen in history in the stock market. Okay, it's bounced back quite aggressively, and now the US market's higher than it was, but that does have a massive impact on the performance of my portfolios, but also the impact on the industry in terms of the money the industry is making, and therefore could lead to job losses. So it is important that the economy stays afloat. It is important that we that we handle this crisis as well as we can, because that will ultimately have an impact on the economy overall.
So winter, we're going into winter. They're predicting lots of boom during the winter period, and things could go. How do you reassure your clients whilst all this sort of like doom and gloom of around the world being said, particularly in the UK, saying, well, we're going to have a very bleak winter. Is your conversation very different to the conversation that's said in across the press?
Yeah, I just say that this is only one risk that we look at. There's the China-US friction risk.
Yes.
Which seems to be a Cold War part 2 that we're seeing. There's also Brexit, and it's almost kind of been taken off the printed press, but we are coming close to this crunch time for a Brexit deal to take place. There's the US election. The US election is coming up as well, and that could have a massive impact on markets and their direction. So there's always risks out there. There's always uncertainties. Yes, this risk is the pandemic risk. It is significant, but a lot of clients are, even though you've had the worst falls in history in markets in such a short space of time, a lot of clients are sitting on huge gains since 2010. I mean, US equity, US share prices are up 250% since 2009. So, one thing we do educate clients on is that markets can be volatile, and markets have been volatile this year. But importantly, markets also look forward. They don't stay in the present. They say, actually, what's the economy going to look like in 2021, 2022, 2023? I think that's really important as well. That even though you're facing this doom and gloom in the present, markets are a discounting mechanism for the future. So actually looking forward and saying where are we going to be in the future is more important than where we are today.
Fantastic. It crossed my mind because I do a weekly show from Grenada, and we're talking about Bitcoin. And they're talking about Bitcoin in Grenada because of the economy in Grenada and the way people are not able to make the money they should because of the way the government is built. What would be your advice to people who want to get involved in Bitcoin in Grenada?
Yeah, well, I can't give financial advice, but what I would say is I do get concerned about the growth of cryptocurrencies. So I wouldn't even say Bitcoin.
Right.
I wouldn't say Bitcoin is the best. It's definitely the most well-known cryptocurrency, but I wouldn't say it's the most structured.
Right.
So I wouldn't advise people, but I think people have to do their research and to understand cryptocurrencies as a whole. The one element of caution I would always have with cryptocurrencies is that they're not regulated. They're not regulated by anybody, which is part of the reason why people invest in them in the first place or use them in the first place. I do think that in 5 years, 10 years time, there is a chance that they do become a lot more widespread than they are today, and they could be the future. But ultimately, they've got a long way to go before they can replace fiat currencies. And what I mean by fiat currencies is the US dollar, the pound sterling, the euro.
Yeah. Of course. Right. I want to come back just to finish off talk about Black.
Yeah.
Yourself and community outreach. With all the experience you have and what you do, talk about Black. What is you talk very much about the future, like myself, future now. What are your I won't use the word hopes. What do you intend to do moving forward with talk about Black within the communities?
Yeah. So just before I get on to that, I just say one thing.
Yes.
One aspect of this, of talk about Black and the movement, is to create hope for people. So, one person, I remember one person who I spoke to in the industry who wasn't in a fund management role, was in a reporting role and really wanted to move to what's called the front office, the investment role. And she had all the qualifications, all the credentials. She even invested her own money in her spare time. Yet she told me that if a role came up on her floor, on the investment floor in her business, a black lady, she said she would not even apply. And when I asked her why, she said this. She said, look, I already have a really tough time where I am in a team which is, has representation. When I look at the investment floor, when I look at the top roles, it's even worse. So why on earth would I do that to myself? Why on earth would I go through that with myself? So I'll call her Rose. That's not a name, but I'll call her Rose. So the one objective or the big objective that I have is to try and convince other people, trying to convince the Roses in this world, to take those top opportunities, to actually see it as an attractive proposition, by helping them to navigate the corporate environment. So, community outreach. So community outreach is the one area where we're going to focus a lot more on in 2021, because we developed an after-school program, and this after-school program is for 14-year-olds, and that is an area where it helps to teach 14-year-olds softer skills, teaching about investing their own money, mortgages, savings, etc., etc. And that has been piloted in London. We're looking to move that to Manchester and maybe Birmingham in 2021. We've got the mentoring, which I mentioned. We've got the events. So we do a number of big events, and we invite lots and lots of people to talk about ethnicity and what we're doing and what the initiatives we're working on. But on the community side, I do think that is going to take more thoughts. Where I'm looking at developing a social impact strategy with different asset managers coming together to invest in communities. There's also the knife crime, which is a particular challenge in London, in Manchester, and some of those big cities. So we're looking at what initiatives, what interventions we can make along the way there. And I also think one area to really think about is mental health and how that affects the Black community. And why it affects the Black community as well. So these are all areas that we're working on in making interventions in 2021. I think the big challenge is you can't, you struggle to boil the ocean. So we do need to look at, what's going to be the most effective way of unkinking that community hose pipe. And we want to do it not in a fragmented way, in a holistic way, which brings together lots of resources and focuses on this particular challenge.
Fantastic. Stepping away from talk about Black and being an asset manager, what do you think about the investment structure around Kivani for Manchester United?
Say again, sorry?
What do you think about the investment in Kivani for Manchester United?
All right. You know something. I'm a big United fan, and
that's why I'm asking the question.
I'm a season ticket holder at Old Trafford. Well, I was. There hasn't been any season tickets given out this season.
Right.
I actually think it helps a lot, because when you've got a young strike, and it's very young strike force, right? I think Martial's 24, Rashford's just turned 23, and Greenwood is like 19. That's a very young strike force. Actually having some experience alongside them, whether it's Igalo and Cavani, I think that is actually really helpful for them. But I think as a team, if they get older together, once they hit that kind of 24, 25 year age, and you get your average squad to the average age of your squad to that level, that in history has been at the time where sides start to really come into their own. So I do respect what Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is doing in building a young team, because once that team gets to a certain age, I think that they're really going to develop into being a very good team. But at the moment, they're just too inconsistent.
Yeah, you're playing Arsenal soon, so long-lived inconsistency.
Yeah.
So, Justin, how do people learn more about this thing about Talk About Black? How do people get involved? And they listen to what you're saying and say, "I like the sound of that."
Yeah, so follow me on LinkedIn. So Justin Onuekwusi. There's also at Talk About Black on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I'm on Twitter as well. There's also, if you're interested in, if you just started your corporate journey, or you're a student, N Circle is the name of the mentoring circles that I do on a monthly basis. So EN Circle, ENCIRCLE. That as well is on LinkedIn. Please follow that, and you'll find out more about the mentoring circles that we do. But yeah, if you follow me on Talk About Black on LinkedIn, you'll get that information of what we're doing and how to get involved, which is really important.
Justin, do you have any final words before we come to the end of our interview?
Look, I think that underrepresentation in our industries is a real problem. And it's very easy to point the finger at our corporations and say, they need to do more, and clearly they do need to do more, but we as a community, as people, we also have to do more. We have to get out of our comfort zone, either to mentor and help others who are less fortunate than us, to really work on the areas which we need to work on, to seek out mentors and sponsors that can help us navigate that corporate environment, because it's very difficult to do to do by yourself, and all of that takes some serious hard work. But it's not just working hard in the office, it's looking at your overall skill set and saying, where can I really push myself? Where can I really improve? And look, the senior people in your industry will hopefully be making the corporates and the companies feel uncomfortable. But we have to make sure that we're feeling uncomfortable ourselves and pushing ourselves.
Absolutely beautifully said, Justin. And I don't want this to be a one and done conversation. I want to continue having these conversations. Absolutely, because I think it's something that many of us need to know more about. And the more we know about it, and the more we come to understand it, we come to accept it more as part of something that belongs to us, rather than us thinking it belongs to them and we'll just watch.
Exactly.
Justin, thank you so much once again for taking your time to talk to BWTM Online, and we look forward to speaking to you very soon.
Thank you for having me. Thanks a lot. Cheers.